You know, our DNA is like an ancient library, holding stories we've long forgotten. Well, today, we're going to pull one of those books off the shelf. We're playing detective, looking into a mystery hidden deep in our own genes. It's a case that points to a time in our past when, for some reason, our male ancestors nearly disappeared. Okay, let's get into it. Everything hinges on this number right here, 17. Because at one specific point in human history, geneticists found that for every single man who passed on his genes, there were 17 women. I mean, just look at that. A 17-to-1 ratio. That isn't just some statistical blip. It's a massive, catastrophic drop in male genetic diversity. It screams that something happened, something that either wiped out a huge number of men or it created a world where only a tiny fraction of them were able to have kids. And that is our mystery. What on earth happened? Now, just to be clear, this is not science fiction. This whole mystery comes from a huge study back in 2015, published in the journal Genome Research. Scientists were studying the Y chromosome and they found this genetic ghost in our machine. They found the evidence of the crime, and now we have to figure out what caused it. Okay, to really get this, we need to talk about something called effective population size. This is super important. It doesn't mean the total number of men walking around suddenly dropped to almost nothing. What it means is the number of men who are actually passing on their genes. That number fell off a cliff. It's a measure of genetic diversity, and for men, it crashed, while the female effective population size, well, it was doing just fine. So, right, how do you even begin to investigate a crime that happened thousands of years ago? Well, it turns out the evidence is right inside of us. It's written in our DNA. And by looking at very specific parts of our genetic code, scientists can actually reconstruct the history of our ancestors with some pretty incredible detail. And to do this, they have two key tools. First, there's the Y chromosome. It's passed down only from father to son, giving us this perfectly direct, unbroken line of men. You can think of it like a last name that's passed down genetically. Then you have mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. That's passed from a mother to all of her children, giving us that clear maternal line. So by comparing the history of these two separate lines, you can spot when something major affected one sex but not the other. So how do you take that raw genetic data and turn it into an actual timeline? How can you look back in time and see the population numbers rise and fall? Well, for that, you need a pretty powerful statistical tool. The researchers use this method called a Bayesian skyline plot. Honestly, you can just think of it as a genetic time machine. It uses the tiny, predictable mutations in our DNA as a kind of clock to estimate how many reproducing people there were at any point in the past. And what they saw was just shocking. The female line from the mtDNA showed nice, steady growth. But the male line, totally different story. It was growing just fine right alongside the female line, and then bam! Somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 years ago, it just plummets. Women were thriving, but something was absolutely wrecking male genetic diversity. So, what was it? All right, so theory number one. This is the one proposed by the very same scientists who discovered the bottleneck. And they argue it wasn't a single, violent event, but a massive change in how human society worked. A revolution in how we lived, and more importantly, who got to have kids. So here's how the social revolution might have gone down. The idea is, as agriculture started to take over, our whole society got a complete makeover. For the first time, you could accumulate wealth, land, livestock, and pass it down. This led to these powerful patrilineal clans, where all the wealth and power got concentrated in the hands of a few guys. And over many generations, this basically created a winner-take-all system, where a handful of powerful clan leaders and their sons fathered most of the children, while tons of other male lines just got squeezed out. They just disappeared. It's like a slow cultural pruning of the male family tree. But there is another theory, a much more provocative one. What if this wasn't some slow social change over thousands of years? What if that sharp drop in the data isn't a gradual pruning, but the echo of a single world-shattering event that wiped out millions of men all at once? One researcher, Nilesh Nilkanth Oak, calls it a genetic earthquake. He argues that the bottleneck is just too sharp, too severe to be explained by a slow cultural shift. So he points to an event that was recorded in one of the world's oldest stories, the Mahabharata War. And based on his research, he dates that war to around 5561 BCE, smack in the middle of the time frame the geneticists identified. Now, according to the ancient text, this war was on a scale that is just hard to comprehend. We're talking about nearly 4 million male warriors, drawn from the dominant warrior class from all over the known world. And in just 18 days of fighting, almost every single one of them was killed.
The epic is actually incredibly specific about the size of these armies. It breaks them down into a military unit called an Akshahuni. And as you can see, there were 18 of these units in the battle, for a total of nearly 4 million men. If you wipe out that many men, especially men from the warrior and ruling classes who are likely having the most children, that would have a gigantic, disproportionate impact on the Y chromosome landscape.
And here's the crucial part. This theory argues it wasn't just some local squabble. The epic says kings and their armies came from a massive part of the ancient world to fight. And that detail is absolutely essential, because the genetic bottleneck we see isn't just in South Asia. It shows up all across Eurasia. A single war, if it was big enough, could theoretically leave a genetic scar that widespread. Now, this might just be the smoking gun for this theory. When you break down the genetic data by region, a really interesting pattern shows up. The recovery from the bottleneck, that point where the population decline finally stops, it happens earliest in South Asia, the supposed epicenter of the war. Then it happens a couple thousand years later in the Near East, and even later still in Southeast Asia. It looks exactly like a demographic shockwave moving out from India with a time delay. So, where does that leave us? We've got two pretty compelling theories, both trying to explain the same strange echo in our DNA. And for now, the case of the missing fathers, well, it's still officially open. But let's just recap what we know for sure. These are the facts of the case. We know there was a massive, male-only collapse in genetic diversity thousands of years ago. We know it hit Eurasia particularly hard. And we know the signal looks like it started in South Asia and then spread out. Any theory, whether it's about social changes or an ancient war, has to be able to explain all of these very specific, very strange facts. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Our own DNA is a living history book, holding these stories that we've maybe dismissed as myths or just completely forgotten. And as we get better and better at reading our own genetic code, you just have to wonder, what other ancient secrets, what other epic stories are just waiting in there to be found?